All right, guys. So, as I said before, this project is created in a way that we start with the basic fundamentals and we just move our way up to more advanced stuff. So, if you have experience with React, a lot of this stuff you're going to already know. But again, this course is for people that are just getting into React as well. So, we're going to talk a little bit about component level state. Now, component level state means that your state is contained within a single component. So we're going to be creating this user item component, and we're going to add some state to it, which later is actually going to be app level state. We're just going to pass it in as props. But for now, I'm going to add some state, including some stuff from the GitHub API. I'm not going to actually fetch data from the API yet. I'm just going to hard code it. But some things that we want is this avatar, the login, which is the username. I also want to link to the GitHub profile. So over here you can see this is just a page from the API. This is the users. It's an array of objects of GitHub users. And we have login, ID, avatar URL, and HTML URL, which is the link to the profile. Those are the four things that I want. And for now, like I said, I'm just going to hard code them into the component state. So let's jump into VS Code, and in components, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this users. Anything that has to do with GitHub users is going to go in here. So I'll have a file. Let's call this user item.js. And I'm going to generate a class-based component with RCE. Now, one thing that this does is it adds an export here and down here, which we don't need this. So we can just get rid of that. And then for now, let's just output user item like that, just so we can bring it into our app.js and output it. So I'm going to import user item from components slash users slash user item, and then we'll just, for now, we'll just put this right under the nav bar. And like I said, we'll be doing a lot of refactoring. So now this should show, if I go back to my app, you can see user item, and I'm going to add some state. Now there's a couple ways to add state to a class-based component. You can use a constructor if you need to. I wouldn't recommend it unless you need to use a constructor for something else. Basically, it's just a function that's going to run when the component runs. So if we say constructor, and we do a console log here of just 1, 2, 3. If I save that, I'm probably going to get an error, because we have to call a function called super in order to call the parent class constructor. So we would say super like that. And now notice that 1, 2, 3 is actually getting logged over here because the constructor fires off as soon as the component loads. Now we could specify our state in here by saying this.state equals, and state is just an object. It's just a JavaScript object. I'm going to do an ID. Remember, this is a user item, so we'll do an ID, a login. I'm going to use Mojombo, which is the first GitHub user. And then we want an avatar underscore URL for his image, which I'll just grab from the GitHub API, which is right here. And we'll go ahead and paste that in. And then the last thing I want is the HTML underscore URL, which is just the link to the GitHub profile, which is this. And you could grab any of this data if you wanted to. And later on, like I said, we're going to be fetching it through HTTP. So we have this stuff in our state. Now let's say we want to use it in our render. So what I'll do here is I'm going to actually add a class name of card and text center. All right, and then within here, within this div, I'm going to have the avatar. So I'm going to have an image. The source is going to be dynamic. I'm going to pull it from the state. Now, when you want to grab something from state within a class, you use this.state and then whatever you want, which in our case is the avatar URL. Okay, I'm also going to add a class name of round image, which is just a global CSS class I have. Now, you might want to add inline style as well, and you can do that in React by using double curly braces. And it's a little weird. You can't do, for instance, if you have two words like background color, you're not going to do background dash color. You can see that that's not going to work. You would use camel case, so like background color. You also wouldn't use, you wouldn't just say red. You would have to use a string here of red. So it's a little different than regular CSS. Now I don't want a background color. I want a width. And I'm going to set that width to 60 pixels. Okay, so let's save that. And if we go back to the browser, there we go. We have that that avatar URL that's stored in the component state. We're now outputting in the image. Okay, and then underneath that, I'm going to have, let's see, underneath the image, I'll have an H3, and I'm going to put in the login. So this.state.login. And then I also want to link to this right here, this HTML URL. So I'll go ahead and put an A tag. Actually, let's put a div. And then I'll put an A tag with the class of BTN, BTN-dark. I'm going to make it a small button, so BTN-SM. And then I also want a little bit of margin on the top and bottom, so I have a class called my-1. And this is going to go to the GitHub profile. So we want from our state, this.state.html_URL. And then for the text, we'll just say more. And let's save that and go back, and there we go. So we have the avatar, which is coming from the state, the login, and then the link. If I click that, it should take us to his profile. And all that stuff is stored in the component level state. Now, like I was saying, you don't really need to use a constructor just to define your state. What we could do is completely get rid of all that and just take state and then what it's equal to, cut that, and get rid of all this stuff and simply put in state equals and then our state. If I do that, we get the same result. All right. Now, you might notice that we keep repeating this dot state in a lot of places. In this case, what I would do is destructure, so we can actually pull the values out from the state. So above the return, we could say like const and then open up some curly braces and say equals this dot state. And what the curly braces signify is just destructuring it, pulling stuff out from that object. So let's pull out the login, the avatar URL, and the HTML URL. Whoops. HTML URL, and then we don't have to actually say this dot state. I'm just going to select all of these and get rid of them, and it just looks a bit neater, and it works the same way. Okay, so we have our user item component, and we have some state within our component. Now, we obviously don't want to just have one user item inside of our app.js like this. This makes no sense. What we want to do is we want to have a bunch of users, and we want to loop through them and output each user item component with each different user, just like we see here. You can see that we have multiple user items. So in the next video, we're going to create the users component, which wraps all of this, and then we'll have the state within the users component. We'll loop through all the users because it'll be an array of users, and then we'll output a user item for each one. And the way that we get the data into the user item is through props, which we've already gone over. All right, so we'll start to do that in the next video.